Good morning, BAC. My name is B2, and thanks for joining with us today. If you like what we do here, make sure you like, subscribe, and log to our YouTube channel or our Facebook page as well, because we're called to evangelize to the world. Thanks, and have a blessed day.
Well, hi, everybody. This is Pastor Frank. You're tuning into the BAC station, Thursday Night Chapel. And here we are at 2025. Man, the new year has come into our picture, and I get to kick off the new year. But before I go into my message today and my teaching, do me a favor, when you get a chance, let Jim or Matt or Sherry, if you're in the church, if you're not, it would be nice to get a text from you guys sometimes, just how their teachings are helping you grow and mature, because that's our idea, is we want people to grow and mature in these lessons. Also, I'm starting a new series for the first of the year, and it's all about how you can get blessings and better yourself and position yourself with God. I'm calling it the Year to Love. And I think it has a lot of good stuff, and I would encourage you, if you could, if you're not, to tune into that one as well. But today we're going to get back into our study that we left off of last in 2024. But as we say every time, learn to share. We really encourage everyone who tunes in. Jesus told us to be evangelists, and I think this is one of the easiest tools you can have to send these messages to your friends or people sometimes. It just takes a quick share, and if you like it, that means you become part of us, but we would encourage that to everybody, and maybe someone will grow out of it, who knows. But we're doing our study on David. I started this clear back in 2003, and with the breakup of all the different teachers now trying to give different flavors in our menu, in our discipleship menu, I'm kind of constricted more to 2 times every 4 weeks. And so we've been doing David, a book that was a study done by a guy that I really appreciated and tooled under for a lot of years online, Chuck Swindoll. And the book is A Man After God's Own Heart. And so we've been following David. I don't know, I kind of personally, I connect with David. One thing I love about the Bible, especially David's life, his good and his bad is shown. And that's what I like about it, I think, more than anything. And David shares in the Psalms his heart, his feelings, and even his actions. And for a leader, he's a great guy to follow in many ways. And with his mistakes, as we point out every once in a while, those are things we can learn not to do as much. And so we're going to get in today. And today we're going to start with, we're starting with the second book, 2 Samuel. We finished 1 Samuel. And in that one, we studied the life of David. We spent a great deal of his time waiting. He has to wait on the Lord. And so I want to go right there. And waiting on the Lord. And he waited a long time. David had a great faith in God. He patiently waited to fulfill his promises. The book of 1 Samuel's all about that. It's about his struggles. He was told he would be king at a young age. And here he is he's at 30 now, and he's finally getting to see it. King Saul, God promotes him. He beats this giant, has this great victory. And then Saul brings him in, and then Saul gets jealous. And we went through all that, and David had these ups and downs. And, he was a great warrior, a military for King Saul, because God's favor was on him. And then David had to escape. He had to leave one of his best friends, Jonathan. He lost a wife. We know all of this. And so he went on to this cave, and he had to hide with his family because his whole family was now in trouble. And I'm sure the writer says David may have wondered when God's promises that would bring a king come true. And he had struggles, but these struggles were all preparing him for that day. And the book of 2 Samuel tells us how David was finally rewarded, and that's where we're going to start going into. But David had to wait something like 15 years, almost like Joseph. And you think Jesus himself waited 30 years as a man before he actually went into ministry. And there's times we all have to wait. Maybe God right now is putting something on your plate, but you got to wait. It's not time. It's not the right place. It was another 7 years before David would be actually anointed king over all of Israel. And this means David waited almost 20 years if we do the whole numbers. And for 2 decades, he just waited and just was faithful to God. And now it's coming to the end. And David has been through a lot. He's lost a lot, friends and everything, positions. And we can learn a lot about, in his book he writes, we can learn a lot about waiting. One of my biggest heroes of anybody that I've ever learned from about waiting is my mother. I call her the Norms, and Norm's story is unbelievable. My mom was a believer at an early age. She married a man who was of a different faith. He was, well, not a different faith, but a different stream. My dad was Catholic. My mother was Protestant. And my mom, because of the marriage, had to allow the way Catholics work, that we had to be raised in the Catholic Church. And my mom patiently helped us with our confirmations, our baptisms, whatever she had to do, she did for us. But all along, too, my mom would have Bible studies with us every day as little kids, teaching us the Bible and the way she thought we should be taught. And my mom prayed for us. That was the big one for me. My mom prayed, and she prayed. And like David, she didn't have it easy. And it took her 27 years. I was 27 when I come to know Jesus Christ. And I was the first one that my mom prayed for out of my family to come to know Christ, other than my wife was a little bit before me. And then we see my brothers and my sister and even my dad, and now the grandchildren. But I learned that Norms was patient. She never gave up. And that's what I would encourage anyone who's waiting on the Lord, no matter where you're at, don't give up. Don't give up. And as we see this from David. And then we go to the next pick, and we see that now he's going to be crowned king. And we're going to get into that and what sets the stages for all of that. Well, the first thing in 2 Samuel 1:17, it says, at the news of Saul's death. Now we know in 1 Samuel, David had heard about all this. And David laminated with his lamentations over Saul and over Jonathan, his son, after mourning their deaths. So David is broken. The king of Israel has died in battle. Israel has lost the battle. And David's best friend, Jonathan, as we did those studies earlier, and you can go back online and watch them, they all died in battle. And David was broken. The Philistines had won. And David and his men did something that a lot of people would not do. Rather than revel in Saul's demise, David mourns for him. And we can learn something from there. I see people all the time, even in the church, when someone they may not like or may disagree with has a bad situation, they kind of glean about it rather than care about that person. And I think we can learn something from David here. We need to learn to care about people, even our enemies, even those that are mistreating us. And when they died, they mourned for them. And in this time, mourning was big. It was like 30 days. Sadly, today, especially in our culture, mourning is seeing less and less. I have people right now that pass away and they have nothing. They have no time for grief with the family. They don't want anything, and so they have nothing. And it's sad because truly mourning is part of life. It's part of the cycle. It says it in Ecclesiastics, a time to mourn. And I think too many people in America not wanting to deal with death kind of do away with that. But what we learn from David is that he mourned for Saul. And so like I said, in verses 78 and 70 and 71, we're going to look at that next week. We see this panoramic view of David's whole life. And he's now going from fugitive to monarch. He's going from being the fugitive, the number one enemy in Saul's world, to replacing Saul. This is how God works in God's time. Chuck Swindoll writes, Saul's death marked the end of David's fugitive days. It was finally time for him to be crowned king. And David was 30 when he became king and reigned for 40 years. It's amazing he was 30. After that, all the kings had to be at least 30 to become king. The prophets had to be 30 to come in full operation. And what was Jesus? Jesus was 30 years old. I'm sorry, I got a nice Christmas gift from my son Michael. I got a little bit of a head cold, so excuse me for that. And so we see this, and he mourns. But now it's time to move on. There's a place that says a time to mourn and a time to live. And I remember when Samuel grieved for Saul, and God had to tell Samuel, how long are you going to grieve for Saul when he lost his kingdom? And there's a time to grieve, but there's a time to move on, and we see that next. And I love what David does. rather than claiming it, he's already been anointed by Saul. Everyone knows. And rather than him rushing in, like so many of us do, David inquired of the Lord. David stopped and said, before we do anything, I'm going to inquire of the Lord and make sure this is the right time. Shall I go up to one of the towns of Judah? He asked the Lord. And God said to him, David asked, where shall I go? Hebron, the Lord answered him. He even told him what town to go and make his capital. Now, there's many questions and ideas of how did David know this. Some believe maybe the Spirit of God talked to David. Maybe David prayed and got his answer. Others say that the high priest had the Urim, and he had the Thummim, and the Urim would give answers. That's how Moses got his answers from God. We really don't know. It doesn't say, but he got an answer from God. And I think a lot of us need to slow down sometimes and wait on God like David did, and wait for God to give us a direction. I know in my own life, I've jumped into things way too soon, and in the end, I shouldn't have done it. And so we see David. It says, in the course of time, David inquires of the Lord. He knew he'd be king, but although he wanted to make sure it was the right time for God, he wanted to stay with God. And I think this is so important. And then God tells him to move to this town. But I have an application point here for all of us. Before moving ahead with what seems obvious, we should first bring the matter to God. Because sometimes what seems obvious is not. And we have to be very careful. That's why I believe we have to have the gift of discernment. As we're going to see in other places, David does some stuff and he gets ahead of God. That happened to me, and I'll give you this application. I was called into ministry, and for 3.5 years, I did online training and also in-house training with my pastor, and also group training with the district. And it was 3.5 years. And in the process of those 3.5 years, I had an opportunity to go back to my old job. Now, I'm a remote field engineer. I'm traveling all over the tri-state. We're talking Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. That was part of my area. And I could be anywhere at any time on any day. And it took time. I want you to know that. There were some positives to it, but the negatives was I didn't have enough time when I came home, and I was online studying every night, And so this opportunity came up for me to go back to my old job in Knoll. I would never have to travel. The place where I could have worked back at Allied Chemical was only less than 5 minutes from my home. And I had this offer. They asked me if I wanted to come back, paid more money, and I'm tinkering with the idea that I'm going to do this because it'll save me time and some other things. But my wife came to me and said, Frank, you can't take the job. And I said, well, you're not the one out driving in tri-state area every day and all that. I had all my excuses. But Diane had the reason. And the reason was if I went back to the chemical plant, I would have had to work shifts, which would have not have allowed me to preach on Sundays. And she was right. And so I had to turn it down. It looked right, felt right, but you know what? It wasn't right. And when God had the right time, he opened up the right place at the right time, and it was God's favor was all over us at that time. And I'm thankful that I really listened to my wife, and she heard from God. And then we see the city of Hebron, which, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. Hebron. God said, this is the capital for right now. And he crowned, that's where David was crowned king of Judah, just Judah. It's the largest city. It was secure against attacks. It was located near the center of Judah's territory, an ideal location for a capital. And many key trade routes converged there, making it difficult for supply lines that would be never cut off because the city is south of Judah, approximately 20 miles from Jerusalem. Abraham built an altar there. Sarah was buried there, and David's first capital. So it's Hebron. This city has a lot of history with the Jewish people. It's a city in Judah, not in Israel. And so David's crowned king, and the men of Judah came, and not the rest, not of all of Israel, only the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying that the men of Jabesh Gilead were there that buried Saul. So there's two stories here. First of all, this is the second time David's anointed. First time by Samuel, if you remember, at an early age, at around 17. But now this is a public recognition that he's the king. But he was only king of Judah. Israel, the other 11 tribes, but really one tribe comes, and there's 10 tribes and 2 tribes. Two tribes stay under David, Judah and Benjamin. And so the men of Judah publicly anointed David. Like I said, he had been appointed before, but this was like the inauguration that we're going to have here in a couple weeks in the United States, where they say, who's the new president? Well, this is the new king. And the length of David staying in Hebron was about 7 years. So for the first 7 years of his kingdom, David was only a partial king of two tribes, not all the tribes yet. And then we see that in Samuel, we see this political move by David. These people helped these Jebusites, and David honored them. David had wisdom as a leader, and it was for a political move, there's no doubt, but he cared for them, you know, and he's shown what kind of king he will be. He complimented the men. And so he's granting them, like the president, Joe Biden, just last week, I believe it was, gave out awards. If you're in the military, the highest award you can get is the Congressional Medal of Honor. It's the highest award, and that's what he was doing. It's a medal of valor and righteousness, and he was placing that on these people because of what they did and how they helped. And this ended up being a very good political move for David. David was smart. We've got to understand that in our life, in our ministries, it's not just all spiritual. There's also dealing and working in the physical realm with wisdom of God, dealing with people and understanding all of that. And I think a lot of people miss that. It's not all spiritual. Even though the spiritual will affect the natural, we have to operate sometimes in the natural, probably more than most we want to think about. And so now he's crowned king. And then we see a civil war breaks out. 2 Samuel 2, 8 through 10. Let me read it to you. Meanwhile, Abner, son of Ner, the commander of Saul's army, he was the head general of Saul's army, had taken one of Saul's sons, Ishbosheth, son of Saul. And this guy's a real weakling. He's not a strong man. He wasn't with his dad fighting. He's 40-some years old, and he's not even, so he's not a strong leader. He's not. But Abner, who's the general, who's the real leader behind the scenes, like today in our society, the question keeps popping up all the time, who's running America right now? Because they don't believe Joe Biden is because of his health issues and all of that. And it'll come out probably one day who did it. It may be multiple people. That happened with Woodrow Wilson. They found out it was his wife, and they isolate him and all that. And so there's people behind the scenes, and the guy behind the scenes here is Abner. He's the general. And he made him king over Gilead, Ashurah, Jezreel, and above Ephraim. This is all the rest, Benjamin and all Israel. Ishbosheth, son of Saul, was 40 years old when he became king. And he only reigned 2 years. He was a very weak man. He wasn't a strong leader. But you got to understand all the moves going on here, that Abner, that's one of the guys we want to look at, who is the general opposing David, is thinking, if David's going to take over, and then I'm out, so I'm going to do all I can to stay. Kind of like what we're seeing some political moves going on today, right before Trump and his regime takes over, what the other regime's doing to try to put some stops to it. That's politics. And so the northern tribes make Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, their king. And so there's civil war. In 2 Samuel 8 and 9, it says, the nation split in two after Saul's death. And Ishbosheth is there. Now, Joab is the general of David's army. Joab is also David's nephew. He's a great warrior. He's one of David's top warriors all the time with David. The problem with Joab, though, he would remind me a little bit of some of the generals in America we had. During World War II, there was a guy by the name of Patton, who everybody makes a star, but he was a hard guy to deal with, and Eisenhower was probably one of the few people that could deal with him. And then after, in the Korean War, there was a general by General MacArthur, who was a famous general in World War II, thought he knew more about what to do than Harry Truman. And Harry Truman had to fire him. And it was not an easy thing to do in America, but you got to remember, it's the president, it's the leader who calls the shots, not the generals. And so Joab, who's a great general, who was dedicated and faithful to David, but sometimes did some stupid stuff that ended up hurting David. And that happens a lot to a lot of people. But David doesn't oppose these people. He doesn't. Not because he's afraid, but because he's waiting on God. He's trusting God. You know, he could have said, well, God anointed me to be but he didn't. And out of principle, he let this other kid, or not a kid, this man, Saul's son, And he respected Saul. Remember, he respected the kingdom. And that's the way it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be the king's son would be to take over next. And so he didn't make a big deal. Paul told us that later, that we're supposed to honor those in office. Not what they do wrong, but respect the office. And so we see Abner, like I said, he's Saul's cousin. He's the army captain. Ishbosh, and his name means man of shame. What a name, huh? What's the name of your king? Man of shame. A lot of us in America are dealing that right now with President Biden and his age and how it's affecting him. He's embarrassing sometimes. I honestly at times feel sorry for the man. But they prop him up and it's sad. He doesn't know where he's going. He's disheveled. He messes up names. It's embarrassing. So this guy's name is the name of man of shame. And then we see Joab, like I said, he's David's sister's son, Zorah. And this is the whole mess that David has to deal with. When you become a leader, any leader, you're going to have to deal with people. And we remember, we live in a fallen world, and we're going to deal with fallen people. I have a friend right now that's in ministry, and there's someone in his church that's trying to cause upheaval. And he's trying to deal through the mess in love, which I give him credit for. And I told him, I said, you remember, they may not love you back, though. Get prepared for that. And so we're going to see throughout this whole story, this is like a television program, to be honest with you. It's like there's so much intrigue and things going on and plots. And so then there's this battle in 2 Samuel 2:12 and 7. And what Abner and Joab, the two leaders, decide to do, rather than the whole army slaughtering each other, they would pick men from each group, 12 representing the 12 tribes, 12 from Judah's tribe and 12 from the north, and they would fight it out. Like, remember when David went against Goliath, and whoever won. Well, they fought it out, but the sad part is all 24 died. No one survived. So that didn't quell the whole struggle, and it went on. It went on for 7 years. And there was this division. But David's true enemy in the north was not the king, it was Abner, the general. And so we see Abner and we see Joab, and they're kind of like running stuff. And we see a special part of this story that I got to bring up because it has a lot of influence later, the death of Asahel. Asahel is the brother of Joab. He's a faithful man of God. He's faithful to the King David, but his zeal sometimes got ahead of him. He was a very fast runner. And so he's running after, he sees Abner at the battle. He's running after Abner. Abner knows that Asahel is no match for him. He knows he can take this young man. He knows how good he is, and he knows his qualities. And he's running from him, and he's saying, Abner said to Asahel, turn thee aside from following me. Wherefore shall I admit thee, or I shall smite thee to the ground? And then how shall I hold up my face to Joab, your brother? He's saying, if I kill you, which I can do, your brother is not going to take it well. And I'm trying to bring peace, and you're not. And so Asahel refused to turn. And so what he did, turning thee aside from him, therefore he should smite him. And he got his spear, and rather than using the pointed part, he flipped it around and used the wooden part, but it still went into Asahel's stomach, and he died. And he died. Now, it's not good when Abner finds out that his brother died for anything about peace. It's not good for David. It's not good for Abner. It's a total political mess. David's trying to unite, and Abner and Joab, in his zeal to put everybody under his control, is not uniting but destroying. And so we see this picture, and we don't want to miss it. You see, and what we can learn from this, some applications. Number one, you can have a zeal, but make sure it's under control. You know, he pursued his goal past his point. Make sure it's worthy of your devotion. Make sure it's not going to affect everybody else. That's what happens a lot even in churches. Someone gets a zeal for something, but like for the pastor, I'm the pastor, or the leaders. So someone has an idea, and it's a great idea. But I've got to sit down and overlook how it's going to affect the overall application of the whole church. I can't have someone lead worship for 3 hours, and we have children's ministry and 20-some, 30 kids downstairs for 3 hours. So you got to think through those things. And we try to do that here. But even with the best planning, there's going to be problems. And we've got to understand that. But we cannot let our zeal, and then some people get mad if I tell them no. I had an individual here who had a great idea for a ministry, loved it, and she wanted the church to get behind it. The sad part was, by the IRS, I couldn't support her because she was not a non-taxable group yet. And I told her, the moment you get your tax rights, I'll do it. But until then, I can't. Well, she got mad and left our church and went to another ministry and got someone else to support her. I would have supported her. She had a great ministry, but we just couldn't, but she could not see that. And that happens, and we can learn from that. And so then we see that there's a long civil war. It's not short, like the one we had in America. There's a civil war going on in our society right now. It's for morals and ideas. It's an ideological war, not physical. In America today, you have blue states and red states. You have blue cities and the red country. Look at the map. The blue is only in the fortified cities. The red is almost all across America. And so there's a war. And you see it on TV every night, to be quite honest. That's the new battlefield, propaganda. And so we see that. And chapter 3 continues with that. It talks about it. Now there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. Notice you still see it's the house of Saul and the house of David. But David waxed stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul waxed weaker and weaker. So David's realizing, and this is what we have to understand sometimes, if God is for us, we don't have to promote ourselves. God will bring the honor. But how many times we've got to think we've got to promote ourselves? Let God do the promoting. And that's what he does with David, and David's armor gets stronger. Matter of fact, when they're in the battle with Abner and Joab, if you read it, they're in the northern territory. So they must be moving in and strong. And so we have this war going on, and no one's getting any glory. But sometimes God has to do these things to wean out some stuff. I heard one prophet say that of what God's doing in our nation. He had to allow this ugliness to come so we could really see it revealed and then clean it. And so right now we've got a nation at war. David didn't want this. David, when he was 17, told he was going to be the king. God told him he was going to be the king. God's man told him he was going to be the king. His nation, Judah, told him he was going to be the king, but he still ain't the king of everybody yet. And David faithfully honors God, and even his enemy doesn't really. And so, but I want to close up with one last thing that I love what the Bible shows that most books wouldn't, and it's the kryptonite. Superman had kryptonite. It made him weak. And almost every man and every woman, because we're fallen, has some kind of kryptonite. And what was David's? David's kryptonite was his weakness for women, just like Samson way before him and others. David had a weak for women, like many leaders today. Some of the men in the Bible had struggled, and David, as well as his sons, struggled with this one. They had an appetite for women, and back in those days, a king was allowed to have more than one woman in the society, not in God's plan. God even told him when they wanted Saul, he said, the king will be allowed to take your wives and daughters. And the people said, that's okay. No, it's not okay in God's eyes. And so we see David. And it says in this verse, and unto David there was a son born in Hebron, and his firstborn was Ammon. And then it goes on and it tells about all the other sons. And David has polygamy. He has all these women. And so, sadly, the sons born to David and the wives caused him great trouble. And this is an issue for all leaders. Your home got to be strong. What does Paul say about elders? They must be the husband of one woman. Paul clarifies that. And even in our days today, we have even pastors. They think they can have a harem and all that. It's crazy. No. And so they have an appetite. And if you have an appetite for lustfulness, well, then you need to go to God and get rid of it and put it to death. And we all have to be careful. We truly do. God says in Deuteronomy, be careful on this one. And so he has all these sons and wives, and it caused him great trouble. Matter of fact, the one son rapes the sister, the half-sister of another son, and it causes great conflict. We're going to see that later on. And what I get out of this, and then Solomon takes examples of his dad, and it gets worse. And so what I see out of this is for leaders, we've got to be careful. You've got to be careful that you're not swayed into that, because it's just the natural tendency of a leader. Well, I can have that. I know of some famous pastors and men and leaders who had, almost all of them had extramarital affairs. Some of them was pretty well known. And that's terrible. But David had it, and it shows it here. So it's telling us, to warn us that even a good leader close with God needs to be careful. The enemy is sneaky. And then there's another story about a woman, and that's Michal. David was first promised Michal, Saul's daughter. And David was supposed to have his wife, but when Saul got jealous of David, he took her away from David and gave her to another man. And so David's now trying to make a deal with Abner about bringing peace. We see later on, as we'll get there next week. And one of the deals was that he gets his wife back. Yeah, David wants this wife back. Now, there's a lot of reasons. One, we know David loved her. Two, she was of the house of Saul. So politically, David now has Saul's family in his family. So you see how that all works political. That's why a lot of these kings marry different women. It's political reasons. Sometimes they don't even get to see the women after that. They marry daughters to keep peace. They did that all the way up to the 17th, 18th century, where they would do those kind of things. 1800s. We're still doing that to bring peace. And so some of it could be for that. And so David now has this other woman in the group, Saul's daughter. Later on, we're going to see that she kind of messes with David, because she had to marry someone else. And over those years that David was away, she really fell in love with this guy. And his name was Peltai. And it said, you can find it in 1 Samuel 25. But I really feel sorry for this guy. Out of nowhere, Abner comes and grabs his wife and takes her. And he's going after her, crying for her. And no one's helping him. You talk about injustice. No one's helping him. And in the end, everybody's messed up. David brings her into the house. He's going to end up causing him trouble. She has trouble. She gets cursed actually by God, as we're going to see. And Peleth, how about that poor guy? He didn't do anything wrong. And he loses his wife. We can learn something from this. Stay true to God's idea of marriage. One man, one woman. Stay true to it, and it'll cause a lot less wrecks. As a pastor, I have to deal with a lot of wrecks. And I just wish people would follow God's. Someone just texted me a while back, a woman, and she's having problems with her husband, and she's part of the problem too. It's not just his fault. And I texted her back after she moaned to me about him, and I said, well, that's part of the problem. In a good marriage, both have to learn to die to things and self, and that's the only way it works. And so this is something we can apply too. This is what I love about God. He doesn't take David's failures. He doesn't airbrush them out. But we can learn through them and get successful. And so as I wrap this all up tonight, what did we read and what did we learn? Number one, there's times to wait on God. And I really mean wait on God. Just because something looks right doesn't mean it's right. Make sure the timing's right. Make sure everything's to where God wants it to be right. And we need to seek God in all of that. Even if it looks right and someone says, hey, I want you to come and speak here. Hey, I want you to come and fill the pulpit. Hey, I want you to lead this ministry. I would tell everyone, let me pray about it first. Because maybe it sounds good, but maybe God doesn't want you to do that. Or maybe God has someone else that he wants to put in that place. Like David with his brothers. You remember Samuel thought it was the brothers? So we got to seek God. Another thing we got to do is truly work on our weaknesses. This is one of my weaknesses. I don't like working on my weaknesses. I like driving with my strengths and let other people deal with my weaknesses. That's not right. We have to learn to work on our weaknesses, whatever they are, because our weaknesses will lead us to more sin, like David with women. We also need to have a strong home, men. We need to have a strong home. Yeah, our ministry is important, our work's important, our life's important, but our home, according to God, is the most important thing. And we've got to be there for our kids, and we've got to be the dad and be the husband. And David says that, and so does Paul. Paul says, if you want to be a leader in the church, you got to be the husband of one woman. And then the last thing we see with these women and all that, evil causes hurts. Evil brings hurts to even other people who didn't have anything to do with anything. How many innocent people, you may be one of those innocent people, were hurt because of someone else's evil action? Evil has tentacles. It doesn't just affect the person who's in the evil moment, but it goes out and affects the family, friends, and all that. And so be careful. Be careful. And when you see someone else in evil, try to steer them out of it. It says that, to pull them out of the muck. But don't fall in the muck with them. Amen? So we had a nice study on David tonight. He's going to become king. He's partial king. Next week we'll see how he ends up getting it all. It's so intriguing. It's unbelievable. But like we always say, and this is how I close all of them now on my Thursdays, Jesus told us, he gave us authority, that if we're welcome into a home, and tonight you welcome us into your home or on your phone, whatever, your iPad or computer, Jesus says, if you receive the word of God, then we, the one who's bringing it, the teacher, can bring peace. And that's my heart for all of you tonight. I pray this message may have brought you peace in some fabric of your life. I pray that this new year, that you would have a year of peace, shalom. And that idea of shalom is more than just everything's perfect. It means that there's prosperity, there's blessings, and far more than what most of us in America understand peace. So I pray that for all of you tonight. I pray you would receive that and that blessings would come your way. And if they do, how about emailing us and let us know? We like to hear when things go good. And lastly, your assignment is to share this message. B2 tells everyone every week on Sunday, and we're asking everyone to share and get the gospel out there. Just hit the share button right now. Send it to some people. And you'll be doing your job for God. And so I just want to ask you again to open your heart to the love of God and allow the love of God to pour into your home and into your heart, and all things will be well with you. So until we hook up again, you guys be blessed.
Hi, my name is Francesca. I'm the administrator here at the BAC community. I hope that you enjoyed today's gathering. I would like to take a moment to encourage you to check out our website. It has all the faith community news and updates, as well as information on the BAC community. If you feel the desire to help support the ministry, there is an option on our website to help support us. Log on to bacwn.com and click the tab called Support on the top of the page. Also, if you would have a need for prayer, guidance, or benevolent help, email us and someone from the leadership team will contact you. If you have a question, just ask online and we will see that your request will be answered. Again, thank you so much for gathering with us today.